as a physicist, you just tell people the information. If it's true information and you can show the studies, of course they'll just do it. No. And so now I'm trained as a health coach, and I understand that people are coming at it from all different angles, all different directions. And in the last few years, that's been a huge part of it for me, is building a practice which recognizes that you have to kind of meet the human where they're at.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Anthony Chaffee here with another episode of the Plant Free MD podcast. And today I have a special guest, Ali Houston, who's joining us over from, I think, Scotland. Is that right?
That is absolutely right. I'm in Glasgow, Scotland.
Ah, lovely. So, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your background and what you do?
Yes, just want to say thanks very much for getting me on. Really appreciate it. I've been following what you've been doing with the Plant Free MD, and I think it's brilliant to see someone who's, a careful advocate of good science, doesn't overstate things, who holds up good evidence. I think they're not necessarily overrepresented in any camp or area. So I appreciate you.
Well, not a problem. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I'm a health coach, metabolic mental health coach, to give it the full Sunday title.
Mm-hmm.
But I started out as a physicist and engineer, and I've had really nasty health problems for most of my life. From when I was a kid, I had autoimmune diseases. I needed surgery a couple of times for one of them, where my esophagus closed up. It's called achalasia of the cardia. It's very rare in children. I was part of a study to look at this internationally in children, and had a couple of balloon dilations because, like much of modern medicine, it was really about, instead of understanding a root cause, kind of having a surgical or medical solution that patches over. And, seasonal depression was there throughout my life, chronic anxiety, which was really bad. I got an ADHD diagnosis as an adult, and was put on Ritalin for that. And the other autoimmune disease I had was called sarcoidosis, where I had these kind of target-shaped rashes on my skin, and also as part of a follow-up that I would get for testicular cancer that I had when I was a teenager. I had shadow on the lung, which they had to investigate, and turned out to be more sarcoidosis. So I was not a well person. And throughout my 20s, I gradually had problems with my weight as well. And I'd started a PhD in physics round about 10 years ago now. And I was unable to function at the level that I knew I could mentally. I'd struggled with my health even when I was doing my undergraduate degree. Really, I was falling asleep in the afternoons, and I was unable to work then, but I still managed to get a good degree, and worked in industry for a few years, and decided that a PhD would be the thing. So I started this PhD in gravitational wave physics, was really underperforming, and my weight was fluctuating in a way that I didn't like. Plus, I still had all the problems of chronic anxiety, seasonal depression, and so on. And I was quite fortunate in a sense that one of my supervisors, a physics professor who's just recently retired early, called Ken Strain, he had healed his chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, by changing how he ate. So he was told in his early 40s that he probably couldn't work again. He was more or less bedridden, terrible brain fog, couldn't walk more than about 50 yards without collapsing. And he did what he does best, which is research, came across Gary Taubes' Good Calories, Bad Calories, and changed to a low-carb diet. And within 6 months, he was running 10Ks again. So he, over the next years, developed this sideline, as well as being a kind of eminent physics professor, in nutrition. And so he'd already gone down these rabbit holes when I came along as a sort of promising student who was clearly underperforming, couldn't think clearly, couldn't articulate my thoughts very well all the time, and wanted to do well, but was kind of hitting this bottleneck. And Ken said, you know, there might be a couple of things going on here. There might be a deficiency. There might be, given my history of autoimmune, you know, it could be pernicious anemia or something around B12. And he wouldn't evangelize about it. That's not his style at all. But he would say these strange things that got me curious, like wheat isn't food, or nobody should be eating margarine, or I only eat once a day and most of it is fatty meat. And, you know, if it wasn't a physics professor who was saying these things, I think I would have struggled to take them seriously, which kind of shows me up as the intellectual snob that I probably am a little bit. But at the same time, I thought, well, this is someone who's coming from a field where you have to be super sure of what you're saying, and the science has to be really nailed down before you publish. And he's saying these things. So I started asking him where I could read more. So he was telling me about Hyperlipid, the amazing blog that Peter Dobromilski's been doing for 20 years or so. And I read that a couple of times back to front. I found out about Tucker Goodrich's blog into 2016 and read that back to front as well. You know, all the stuff that he got onto with seed oils originally from Stefan Guillenet, and right into the sort of corners of the carnivore world, like Zero Carb Zen and these communities which existed back then, and other people, particularly around mental health, like Georgia Ede, who had Diagnosis Diet at the time, and that was very helpful, full of, you know, simple articles that stated the science as she saw it. And I very quickly decided, well, I'm going to try this, but I didn't really think at the time that it would affect my mental health the way it did. I thought I'd be thinner and maybe supplementing a bit could help with the brain fog. But what happened was I switched to a kind of paleo keto diet, ultimately paleo, initially keto. I did have butter and cream. And then within weeks, the issues that I had cleared up. So my anxiety dropped down to almost zero. The ADHD symptoms more or less went away. You know, I didn't have that brain fog anymore. It felt like I had access to my brain again, and my mood lifted. And when I did that in March 2016, when it came round to winter again, I kind of feared the juggernaut coming, you know, this seasonal depression, which had affected me my whole life. And it just didn't come. It didn't appear at all. And I was thin and I was able to control my weight properly. And so, and I didn't feel hungry. You know, it was all these amazing things that you hear from people in this community. And I kind of post facto tried to understand the science more deeply by reading things like Hyperlipid and getting into the papers on PubMed, you know, the sort of search engine for medical literature, and moved away from the physics and began to think, well, how can I help people to do what I did? And fast forward, what is it now, 7 years, and I'm doing what was the most profound and cherished change for me in my mental health. I'm a metabolic mental health coach, helping people to do the same thing for theirs. So it's been a bit of a journey. You know, I've had some. I made food for people initially. I made meals and sent them around, and did pop-up restaurants and tried to get the word out there. I did a cookbook with the foreword by Dr. David Unwin. I basically just decided I've had my Damascene moment. I need to go out there and tell the world about it. And I'm sure a lot of people feel like that. But for me, that was the thing. It was the mental health. It was having my brain back, which was so powerful.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing, man. Like, and that's well, it's just great that you were able to find something that got your health back and got you doing something that you're very passionate about. So you've been coaching for 7 years now?
So informally, really, from the get-go, anyone who wanted information or kind of advice, I would happily give it. And part of my kind of transformation, if you like, I sometimes call myself a recovering physicist, has been to realize that people don't necessarily want unsolicited advice. In fact, they hate it. So as a physicist, you can think of like a typical physicist, maybe like Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory or something, like someone open a window, it's about to get smug in here.
Yes.
There's like a kind of mode of thinking that is very often attached to physicists, which is completely understandable because they tend to have the top ones tend to have such a powerful grasp of logic that if the world can't be described in that way, if a particular thing can't be described in that way, then they're likely to just discount it as non-information or bad information, silly, woo-woo, all of these words. And actually, I think you kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not either or, it's both and. And so I formalized my transformation into a coach with a diploma level coaching certificate from Precure, which is a really cool company out in New Zealand run by Grant and Louise Schofield, public health professors. And I was stunned when I started my training because they are advocates of low carb eating for metabolic health. I was stunned that they said almost you mustn't give advice unless people ask. And so this kind of bolted on this set of skills, which I thought I didn't need. As a physicist, you just tell people the information. If it's true information and you can show the studies, of course they'll just do it.
Mm-hmm.
No. And so now I'm trained as a health coach and I understand that people are coming at it from all different angles, all different directions. And in the last few years, that's been a huge part of it for me, is building a practice which recognizes that you have to kind of meet the human where they're at. Like, take an example from my own life. I used to smoke a lot of cigarettes. It helped, I think, with kind of regulating my emotional landscape and my attention when these things were a problem. And it got really bad. I lived in China for a year teaching English, and I was smoking 40 a day. It's almost like a sort of national service over there. Everyone does it. I saw a doctor smoking in a hospital corridor. But yeah, I didn't quit smoking in 2014 before I changed my diet because I knew it would probably kill me. Of course, I knew it would probably kill me. I had the information. I quit because I read a scientific article which said that when smokers are smoking, 80% of their dopamine comes from the nicotine. And it disturbed me to find out that I was regulating my attention and my emotional landscape externally. And so I quit. But nobody could know that about me unless they asked. And similarly, if you are speaking to an ill vegan or even just an ill person who eats in whatever way they eat, you get absolutely no idea why they eat what they eat. There's so many things that can be in that, like their family culture when they were growing up, things that their parents would say to them around food, their actual personal preferences around food, which are so individual and unique. And I think that typifies the kind of the important work of coaches and what we used to get called bedside manner doctors. It's like a gearing, it's like a conversion from the hard scientific facts to the human being. And I think you need that in order to make a proper connection.
Yeah. So what sort of people are you helping these days? Is it just anybody looking to try to, just get onto a ketogenic diet, or specific, I know you mentioned that you previously when we were talking online that you work with, Dr. Rachel Brown, who's been a guest of this podcast as well, and obviously she's a consultant psychiatrist in Scotland. So what sort of people do you help coach, and what is your work with Dr. Brown?
Yeah, so sort of starting with the latter question, Rachel Brown's a brilliant psychiatrist, works in emergency care psychiatry, which is a really hard coalface to work at. People coming in with, florid delusions and psychoses and suicidal ideation, and I think it's interesting to know that she's an advocate for metabolic mental health coming from that background.
Mm.
And in fact, she's just treated a patient and who she recommended a ketogenic diet to, who has improved massively. And that may be the first ever metabolically mental health treated patient in the NHS. A kind of monumental moment, I think, for Rachel.
Yeah.
And it coincides with the study going on at Edinburgh University with Dr. Ian Campbell on ketogenic diets for bipolar. So hopefully Scotland and the UK can become quite a pioneer in this. But Rachel and I have seen a need for an interface for doctors and individuals who, have a problem with their mental health to get the support that they need. So that's what we provide. We've got a website called MetPsy.com, METPSY, and ultimately it'll be an app too. And it's to coach people to better mental health using the principles of metabolic psychiatry. So this idea that Georgia Ede, stealing her joke, which I do all the time, studies have shown conclusively that the head is part of the body. And, your brain's metabolism is very, very similar to the rest of the body's metabolism. So if you get that dialed in, then you're going to be doing well. And at least if you've got things like trauma or psychological issues that you need to work through, having a solid platform metabolically is, I think, where you want to start anyway. So Rachel and I provide this coaching service for people, whether they've got a diagnosed mental disorder or not, whether they just want a tune-up mentally and some support about what this information is, and maybe a bit of accountability to help them away from addiction, food addiction, and that kind of thing, all the way through to clinicians who want to offer this as a kind of signpost to their patients. Maybe they've got treatment-resistant mental disorders that they just can't provide a service to their patients for. So we've already started onboarding doctors' practices who want to run small group sessions with us, and I coach one-to-one. And that's not something Rachel does, but I coach one-to-one worldwide, and we're currently got a waiting list for small group sessions. And in the longer term, we're launching the Mental Power course, which is going to be a kind of off-the-shelf course so that people can get all this information, all that good physics, kind of not physics information, but all that sort of left brain scientific knowledge that they need, that's translated for the layperson through accessible videos that Rachel and I are doing with each other and with experts in areas such as addiction and carnivore and paleo and that kind of thing, and some live Q&A time. So they're all the options. And I forget what you asked before.
About
Rachel and my work.
Yeah. You said some of it were people with psychiatric issues, but not necessarily everyone.
Exactly. Yeah, that was it. Who's it for? So, I think the only kind of exclusions would be if someone's going through a mental health crisis, whatever that means for them, or they have acute suicidal thoughts, then coaching's probably not the best road. I think it's important to state that it doesn't seem from the work that other clinicians have done so far that the ketogenic diet helps everyone. And so it's important that people work with their prescriber if they've got a diagnosed mental disorder that they are prescribed medication for. Then fortunately for the people who it does work, a ketogenic diet, they often need to taper quite rapidly away from these drugs, and that can be on a few days time scale. So we've noticed with people who've been coaching that they need to sort of rapidly deprescribe sometimes, which is great. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend just doing it yourself and not telling your prescriber, So there's these kind of guardrails, but that leaves quite a broad range of people that we think we can help, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what are some of the psychiatric illnesses that you and Rachel have seen, be able to help, properly with a ketogenic diet and getting people off medications? What are some of the success stories you've had?
Yeah, so besides mine around, chronic anxiety, which we know multiple mechanisms for why a ketogenic diet can help with anxiety, just dampens right down the all sorts of responses to different types of food. But, even people who don't go keto, they maybe just go paleo or whole foods, they notice that when they cut out the refined sugar, then the anxiety tends to dampen down loads. Treatment-resistant depression is an interesting one because, and bipolar, where you've got the sort of hypomania, mania, and deep depressions. Because, these depressive states are often described by the people who suffer from them as feeling like they're drowning, like they're underwater. And Ian Campbell's work is fantastic on this. Ian spoke at the public health collaboration meeting that Rachel and I were at in Edinburgh recently, and he presented some of his findings from the pilot study that he's been doing. And there's actually biomarkers that he's identified now as metabolic signs that depression is there in a bipolar patient. And so he's starting to really pin down the cause and effect thing going on here with improving your mental health through metabolism. So depression is a very exciting area there, and obviously anxiety and depression are two of the sort of biggest mental disorders that we have in the world. Amber O'Hearn's been on my podcast a couple of times, and she's kind of an anecdote that I go back to over and over again, thinking about the kind of clinical experience of people like Georgia Eade and Chris Palmer, who kind of say that a third of people, ketogenic diet seems to almost send everything into remission. It's like a kind of miracle almost, gives people their lives back. A third of people, it seems to help somewhat, but it's not quite like that. And then a third of people, it doesn't seem to help at all in their experience. But of course, there's so many different configurations of a ketogenic diet. And that kind of description doesn't say on which timescales it's working. And, there's a few variables hidden in that. And of course, we're still just talking about a fairly small clinical data set. It's not massive trials yet. So thinking about Amber O'Hearn and how she was on a ketogenic diet for a number of years without improvement to her bipolar. And then it was Carnivore that pushed her into remission. So certainly anxiety, depression, bipolar. There's some fascinating stuff in the literature prior to us working with people around schizophrenia and psychosis. But Rachel's patient that I referred to, who she treated recently, had psychoses, and they seem to have gone away. So metabolic mental health can affect psychosis. It's not clear what the mechanism might be for that one. There's probably multiple things going on, but there's some really interesting small interventional studies on gluten and schizophrenia, where people with schizophrenia came away from gluten, stopped eating it at all, and their psychoses dampened right down or went away. And even though that happened, some of them started eating gluten again. It's a hard thing to give up, and the psychosis came back. So I think there's a lot to be said for those types of mental disorders. Some of the aggravation in autism spectrum disorder, and certainly psychosis, where gluten and sometimes casein from dairy can be heavily implicated, especially with casein, where there's already damage in the gut from gluten. So how are we doing? We've got anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, autism spectrum disorder. It's broad spectrum, how it helps people, because the gut and the metabolism are just so fundamental. This is something that appealed to me from the very start as someone who studied physics and had to apply it in industry. And then when I was trying to do my PhD work in the lab, is that you're always trying to be as lazy as you possibly can and get away with it. You're trying to find the most upstream thing you can. What is the root cause here? Because if I can get that, then I'll have an easy life. And the gut and how you fuel your mitochondria, that is about as upstream as you can get. You've got between your mouth and your small intestine, but okay, everything else in the body is downstream of that.
Yeah, true. That was interesting. I hadn't heard that about that connection with casein and autism spectrum disorder. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so the literature is not as well developed as I would like to see it. My kind of touch point for that was the work of a Norwegian doctor who I think has passed away now, called Kalle Reichelt. And he looked at the level of peptides in, I want to say the urine, but he may have looked at the blood too, over time after exposure to certain foods. And so he found that so autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disorder. So it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. So when someone has it, they have it. I don't think he or anyone responsible would say that you can get meaningful total remission from it. It's just it's something that happened during the development of the child, and then it brings with it certain symptoms. But what he found was that if a gluten and casein-free diet was very strictly adhered to, that the symptoms associated with the autism spectrum disorder would be greatly alleviated, if not totally alleviated. And it made the lives of the kids and the parents a lot easier, because the socialization was easier, and the kids just didn't feel as isolated, uncomfortable, in pain, etc., etc., etc. And he was able to measure the level of gluten and casein peptides over the course of weeks and months. And he found that even a single meal containing some normal amounts of casein and gluten could produce a signature in the urine, I believe, over weeks. And his hypothesis was that they were circulating in the body for that time, causing assault, whether that was in the gut or in the brain or both, and that it aggravated the symptoms. So there, if you look for Reichelt on PubMed, you'll find some of his publications, and then obviously, you can then go down the rabbit hole of who's that cited by, and who did he cite, and all the rest of it, and make up your own mind. But to me, there's a very clear, sharp signal around dairy, which unfortunately doesn't get picked up too much in the keto or carnivore community, that it can cause real problems for people, especially if they're already kind of...
Hey everyone, if you need a little extra help getting started on a carnivore diet and my online resources that I have for free aren't enough for you, you can go to www.howtocarnivore.com and sign up for a 30-day carnivore challenge where you'll have online resources, group support, weekly Zoom meetings, as well as the ability to chat live with myself, Simon Lewis, and the others in the challenge who can help you and support you and give you extra advice and help you along the way. So if that sounds like something that would be beneficial to you, then please go to howtocarnivore.com and sign up. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you there.
I've certainly noticed that with autoimmune issues. Like I don't really have a problem with dairy myself, but I do notice that people with autoimmune issues seem to struggle with dairy, and like you mentioned, it often is worse when their gut's damaged. So, or when they come early on to a carnivore diet, they seem to really not be able to tolerate dairy really at all. Then 6 months down the road, when ostensibly the gut's had time to heal, they seem to tolerate it a bit more. And so just by simple, active observation, I've come to recommend that, just saying, hey, try to be as strict as you can for the first 6 months or so. And then maybe if you feel the need to, you can sort of introduce those things back in and see how they go. But yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that with autism before. That's very interesting. I had, when you're talking about Amber O'Hearn, I didn't know that about her, how she was struggling with her mental health, and keto wasn't really helping, but then she found resolution on carnivore. I noticed a similar thing just with myself. I get periodic issues with depression, just runs in my family, and normally it's manageable, but sometimes it gets worse than others. Haven't had an issue with that when I've been on carnivore, but I did notice that when I was just coming back into carnivore sort of 5-6 years ago, I was, I guess I was basically doing keto, because I was just eating veggies and eating meat, but I wasn't eating anything else. It wasn't like I was, doing keto consciously. I just wasn't eating carbs and sugar and alcohol and things like that. And, I didn't feel great. I didn't feel wonderful. And then I dropped the greens and I felt amazing. My mental health and mental clarity really, really changed dramatically. And then I noticed sort of a few months into it, my parents wanted to try it. And so I was helping them with that. And so my mom really loves cooking. And so she was cooking this big lamb roast. And she just and that her workaround was to just cover this thing in every single herb and seasoning that she bought. It was literally a green log. Like that's what it was. It wasn't even like, just had some, like, it was green. It was a green lump of lamb. And I was like, Mom, like the whole point is you're not supposed to have plants. Like plants have things that aren't good for you. It's like, no, we're not having any plants. It's just the meat. It's just the meat. I was just like, yeah, it counts if it's on the meat. Like you can tip a bag of cocaine in your coffee and be like, oh no, it's just coffee. But like, there's something. And so we ended up having that. I remember like being really sort of, resistant to it. And I was like, maybe I should just try to scrape this stuff off. I really don't want this stuff. But I was still, a bit more self-conscious back then, and I didn't want to be rude, and I didn't want to sort of, it was, stuck on there, just been cooked onto it. And so I thought, well, maybe I just eat it and not make a fuss, and then just see, and I'll see, what that does to me. I was so upset and so depressed for the rest of the day, just from those little greens that were on this thing, to the point that I was just, I couldn't deal with the dinner table conversation. I was getting so aggravated and so upset by very normal things looking back that, my family were saying. I was just getting so bent out of shape, very unreasonably. And I recognized this unreasonably, but I was getting so upset. And I remember actually just being down in my room and being so angry and so depressed and so upset that I became suicidal. And I was actually not even contemplating, I was planning my demise. I was saying, this is how I'm going to do it. I have a gun in a safe. I'm going to do this. And then I remember thinking like, well, I don't want to like, because I was helping my parents out with some health issues. So I was staying in their house and like my room was right below them. I'm like, oh, well, I don't want this to go off and then have a bullet go through and hit my parents or have, scare the hell out of them with some big loud noise. So I'm actually thinking this. And all of a sudden I just like came to my senses. And I'm like, why the hell am I thinking this? Like I don't, nothing happened that was so bad that I should be wanting to die. But that is how I feel. And that is what I want. And so I recognized at that point that this was pathological, that there was something going on with my brain chemistry that was causing me to feel this way. And I was like, okay, I don't know what the hell's going on here, but I'm just going to sleep on this. And if I feel the same way and I want to kill myself in the morning, then I'll do it then, and I'll just do that. And I woke up in the morning and I was just emotionally numb. I did not feel like doing that anymore, and thankfully. And I remember just waking up. The first thing I thought was, what the hell was that about? And I thought back to the conversation. I thought back to everything that went on. I was like, there was nothing that should have set me off like that. There was nothing that should have made me feel that way. And I remember thinking, I was like, did I just completely overreact what was going on? Or was there something in those stupid herbs? So I was like, what? One way to find out. And so I just went and had a couple more pieces of the lamb, and I was absolutely depressed the rest of the day. And so, but I understood why at that point. And so even though I was upset and I was bent out of shape, I was just like, okay, this is what's going on. And I could focus my ire where it belongs, which are these damn plants. And so I was just like, right, well, I'm never touching these stupid things again. And that's the funny thing, people say like, well, how are you so disciplined? It takes a lot of willpower and discipline to like just eat just meat and water. I'm like, it takes no discipline at all. I have so much aversion to these things because I've seen the other side and I've seen what I'm like without it. And I'm like, I want absolutely nothing to do with that. Now, I was never getting that depressed previously. So what I attribute that to is that I was away from this stuff for a long time. Previously, I built up a tolerance. I built up an immunity to this stuff. And so this was just normal background noise, and I've learned how to cope with it. But then being away from it for a while and having very good mental health, coming back to it, it hit me much harder. And I wasn't used to it. My defenses had gone down. My tolerance had gone down. And I've noticed that since then. I was traveling in Vietnam, and I went out with someone who was hosting me there, which is like an Airbnb, but they were like, oh, we'll show you around and things like that. And got some meat stuff, but it was like mixed in with some greens. I was like, ugh, I don't want to be rude. I'll just have a few pieces. And so I did, and I was very upset and very depressed, but I understood why. Now that I know that, I can deal with it a lot better. I just feel sad and I feel upset, and it's not fun, but I don't get, I don't think about doing anything like that. But I have definitely noticed that with myself. And so, I really am curious about what the hell is going on that is doing that. And so, I'm hopeful that, people like yourself, working with, Dr. Brown and Georgia Ede and Dr. Palmer and things like that can figure this out. Like, what in God's name is going on with these different chemicals to mess up people's psyche like this?
Yeah, well, I mean, what remarkable stories, and thanks for sharing them. And I'm sorry that you went through depression before, and also that you felt that at your parents. I mean, what an awful time. And to some extent, I felt that kind of clean, sharp signal from foods that I've eaten. I think the gold standard for understanding how foods affect us is an elimination diet. There are studies that people can do on populations, but the average respondent to a survey, it is not the individual sitting with you, so everyone has to find out for themselves. And when I was kind of semi-grieving the knowledge that dairy was not right for me as an autoimmune sufferer, I did a food test where I was having a burger and I put blue cheese on it. And then within a couple of hours, I was ironically very blue. And I found out that that was one of my triggers, and I felt dreadful. I was honestly, I've had suicidal ideation as well, and I was not far off that. I was just so down about the world and anything I could think of, and didn't see the point. When I started this whole journey, I did an elimination diet that Peter Dobromilsky had talked about on Hyperlipid, where he said you could support your body entirely with ghee and egg yolks, and in terms of the nutrition there and the calories. So I thought, oh, I'll try that, and it turned out to be a very clean experiment for me. Ghee eliminates most of the milk protein, and you have so much nutrition in eggs. So I was having like between eight and a dozen eggs. Most of them would just be the yolks. It would keep some of the whites in there. And then as much ghee as I felt like eating. And I did that for a month, never felt better in my life. And I could use that as a clean baseline to then test foods. And I found out that at the time I had problems with foods containing histamine. So even some of the best keto foods are quite high in histamine, like your salamis and your smoked fish and that kind of thing. I don't seem to have as much of a problem now, but at the time it gave me brain fog. I had that sort of lack of clarity. I couldn't access my brain power when I had foods high in histamine, so I stuck to fresh meat. And even too much meat, I had to make sure that there was enough fat. And this is kind of an interesting debate going on right now around satiety per calorie that diet doctors trying to bring in and all that. Some people just feel better mentally when they have lots and lots of fat and the particular type of fat that works for them. But yeah, the kind of extreme mood changes involved with food that I felt in 2016 led me to say things to friends like, I just wonder if when people are in a bad mood, it really is about not getting a parking space or getting cut up in their car, or if something's happened in their life, or it's about something they ate earlier, and the amount that can contribute. Because I've found myself far more mentally resilient. Bad things have happened to me in the last 7 years, and I've just felt able to cope and respond to it emotionally in an appropriate way. It's not like my emotions are gone. It's like they're working properly. And, it can be such a roller coaster for folk. I've worked with people with all of the mental conditions that I mentioned earlier, and people's lives are shit, and changing your metabolism can make their lives good. Mm-hmm. It's such a wonderful thing to see, and I'm glad you came out the other end. Wow, what a moment.
Yeah, well, it was. I'm thankful that I had that sort of realization, because it just something clicked. It was like, okay, this isn't right, and that's when I realized, okay, there was something else going on, and that I needed to just take a step back. How many people did not have that, epiphany and realize that and did something that they couldn't undo. It's very sad. Thankfully, I wasn't one of those. Thankfully, I was able to figure that out. But yeah, it's I remember you're talking about something you eat earlier, and I think I do think that. I mean, for me, I've seen that directly, and I've seen that in different patients. I remember one kid I saw in the emergency department, actually right when I first came down to Australia, and he came in for something else. He was majorly depressed and very seriously depressed. And we got to talking, and then we started talking about diet and nutrition. I told him my experience with that, and it turns out that he was actually a big fan of Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson actually came, and Michaela Peterson, his daughter, actually had similar experiences with their depression and anxiety, and they found that getting rid of the greens actually made the biggest difference. And Jordan Peterson went strong keto, just fatty steaks and salads, and that was it. But he was still having crippling anxiety and depression. And they found that, and Michaela, came to him and just said, "Hey, just try it for a month, see how it goes. This has really helped me." And so we said, "All right, well, you can do anything for a month." And I think I remember him actually saying, "Is like, well, you can hang by your fingertips from a windowsill for a month. I mean, that's nothing. You can, in the grand scheme of things, it's going to affect the rest of your life. You can do anything." And so he did it, and after about 3 weeks, his anxiety was seriously improved, and he could get out of bed in the morning, he could do his work, and he could actually function. And he was like, salad was doing this to me. And I was like, yeah, it's filthy stuff. And so, telling him that, and he was able to help himself as well. But I also remember a study that was done in psychology that was, you have so many influences that can affect you unconsciously. There was one that was interesting, that someone was in a park, basically. I had people coming by, and someone needed to tie their shoe. And I go, "Hey, excuse me, sir, can you hold my coffee or my drink or something like that while I tie my shoe?" And so I'm, "Okay, yeah, sure." And so they would do that, tie their shoe, and go off. And then they would have them 5 minutes later in the same park interact with someone else, right? And it would be the same formulaic, scripted sort of interaction. And then they sort of would talk to people and say, "Hey, can you describe that interaction?" They set it up by the cup would either have warm liquid in it or like cold liquid in it. And it was something like 80% of the people that had the warm liquid found that there was a positive experience in the second time around. Same script. And then the cold people was something like 80%, thought about it negative. Oh, they were very rude. They were very abrupt. They said these things. And it was very funny. It was just like that one little difference seem to affect people much more than you would want to believe. Just something little like that, just having some cold in your hand that's just a bit uncomfortable, and then you go off and you feel something, your hand's still kind of cold, and you're like, "Who is this?"
Yeah.
And it's very
this totally speaks to this recovering physicist in terms of going from smug about knowing factoids to understanding what it is that actually attracts people, human beings. We're complicated, funny, annoyed human beings who have backstories, and that needs to be acknowledged. And one of my favorite thinkers in this area is Dr. Ian McGilchrist, who's a psychiatrist who used to be an English literature scholar at Oxford. And he found that he wrote this book in his 20s called Against Criticism, I think, where he realized that when you get into the weeds, dissecting a poem or a book, then, the sort of patient dies on the operating table, if you like. There's something about the wholeness of something that you can appreciate, that you shouldn't try to dissect, or else the meaning disappears. So this is the sort of left-right hemisphere specializations in the brain. We often talk about sort of hindbrain, forebrain, don't we? Like the sort of chimp brain, and then the sort of ability that humans have to plan in the prefrontal cortex. Well, there's this left-right specialization, which he wrote his magnum opus book on after years and years of being a very eminent psychiatrist. So I think wisdom and intuition and the gestalt, the holistic approach, is really something which we need to think about, both in terms of how we talk to people about their own health, but also how we attract people over to our own side, if you want to call it that, versus maybe a vegan approach, or a sort of low-fat approach, or a whatever approach. Because there's this advertising guru who went on McGilchrist's YouTube channel talking about his analysis of what actually attracts people to products on adverts, and it's all of this right hemisphere stuff. It's humans interacting, with an emotional dynamism. It's smiling faces, it's crying faces, it's this sort of humanness. Whereas what kind of it doesn't work in advertising is factoids. So, you know, just sort of dryly telling people what the truth of the matter is. You actually need to meet people as human beings. I think that's absolutely fascinating that just a warm cup meant that they thought that they were warm people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Superb.
Yeah. So, Dr. McGilchrist, when was he at Oxford, by the way? Do you know?
So he was a fellow of All Souls, I think, doing English just after he graduated as undergraduate. So that would probably have been the 70s and into the 80s. And then he's trained as a psychiatrist, and he worked at the Maudsley Hospital down there, I think, in London, maybe that's London, as a psychiatrist, where he was in charge, and I think he did some stuff at Johns Hopkins as well. You know, really, really eminent in terms of like neuroimaging. And this whole time he was thinking, you know, what's going on here? I think he was influenced by people like Oliver Sacks, you know, the brilliant, was he a neuroscientist or a psychiatrist? I can't remember, but he wrote a series of brilliant books, including the man who mistook his wife for a hat, and, you know, talking about the differences that you can glean about the specialization of right and left hemisphere from what happens when people have a stroke in one side versus another side. So, you know, if someone has a stroke in the left hemisphere, then they might lose their ability to speak because that's where that's controlled. Whereas if they have a stroke on the right hemisphere, then sometimes, because it's associated with the left side of the body, it controls the left side of the body. They kind of they feel like maybe their left hand isn't theirs, or that everything on the left hand side is made of cogs or like wood or something. You know, they suddenly lose that sense of humanness and become a purely a machine. So there's this sort of different type of attention we have in the world, this different type of information, and I think we have to use both in order to be attractive to people in terms of our ideas and who we are as people. But McGilchrist is great.
Yeah, I'll have to look him up. He's he would have been after, like, I was asking because my grandfather was actually a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford and did his PhD there in English Lit, and so but he was well earlier there. So he started his Rhodes Scholarship in 1939 and was in Germany when World War II broke out, and then like had to like flee across Europe to like get away. And the path they took was through Poland of all places. And like he was like he and his sister, you know, they crossed like into Poland sort of like an hour before they closed the checkpoint and just raced across Poland, and then got through the other side sort of again like an hour before they closed that border. Made their way through to the coast in France, and got the last boat to Dover from France, and then they send them back to, you know, they send all the Rhodes Scholars back home after that because they're like, hey, look, this isn't safe for anyone here. And so he ended up doing a master's at Harvard, taught there for a while, met my grandmother while at Harvard, and then was actually in the war and was working counter-espionage during World War II because he spoke fluent French, and so they put him in occupied France as a counter spy. So he pretended to be a Frenchman and worked there. And he was the first American spy to turn and work an enemy agent against an enemy, and wrote I think it was called Operation Dragoman. It's kind of pretty dramatic title, but that was it. And it was used in teaching like CIA and things like that, because he was an OSS obviously, and before the CIA came around, and that was used in training, and he was like the first American like that got trained by like MI5 and MI6, and because they liked him. He was, you know, the Oxford Old Boys Club, you know, I'm sure didn't hurt anything, and then he made his way back to Oxford and was there for like, I think, and then at that point he did his PhD there. So he was there for like another 6 years after the war. So he would have been just into the 50s is when he would have left Oxford, and but in English Lit. And so, but he was an expert on Milton, and I suppose he would have been the expert on Milton until he died. But he wrote his 40-year work was all on Milton. And but yeah, so I don't suppose they would have crossed paths, but that would have been cool if they did.
Wow, what a story. What a story. I mean, this is the thing. I studied English literature for a year, and because I love books and I love poems, and I hated the experience. I felt assaulted by it because of this criticism. Some people love it, and I realize, looking back, it's like a technical exercise. You're sort of learning how to be technical around approaching literary criticism. But I just thought, you snuff out the magic. But I think it sounds like your grandfather had this incredible ability to influence people and to attract people, because you would have to be able to do that behind enemy lines, to turn an enemy agent and so on. Like, these stories are wonderful. And I think I'm thinking about some of the physicists that I know, maybe people that are in my class or the professors, and I think if you put them behind enemy lines, then they would be toast, because they would struggle with anything that wasn't literal. It sounds like your grandfather had that ability to use metaphor and simile, and you almost like enact it. Be he almost was a metaphor, a figment of meaning. He wasn't himself. He was someone who didn't exist. And there was this hilarious moment when I was at university where there was this university-wide edict where every department had to teach soft skills so that you could be more employable. So you had, the professor who took that class for us, a very nice man, and he was a really bright physicist, but he couldn't make eye contact with people. And so, you have these people who end up super specialized with the type of brain that they have. And I think someone who's an English literature scholar is far more likely to understand that intuitively.
Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor at Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys.
Yeah, it could be. And thinking back, I always remember him as this very, austere, very, he was literally a tweed suited professor, and so that was always my memory of him, as very severe sort of character. And then when I sort of got a little older, he was very, very nice. He was very good, good person in general, and very kind. And but when I was very young, he was this very stern sort of figure. And so it's always funny to think about. But thinking back, he was very charismatic, and he was very personable, and he was in sort of all those literary societies, and his name was Edward Weissmiller. He was a poet first and foremost, and he got published by Yale Young Poets. He got the Yale Young Poets Award when he was like 15. And so he was like the youngest ever recipient of the Yale Young Poets Award. And he was also awarded again when he was like 85 for another book of poems. And so he was at the same time the youngest and oldest ever recipient of the Yale Young Poets Award, and the only one who's ever received it twice. And so he was friends with Dylan Thomas when he was in Oxford as well, because Thomas lived just outside of Oxford, and so he was introduced to him. Apparently, they were like drinking buddies, and they would just hang out. And he said it was just a delight. All you want to do is just listen to him talk. He was just such a delight to listen to, and so I just sit there, just listen to him tell his stories and talk about whatever. And how he got the job with the OSS, it was straight out of a movie. He got this call in the middle of the night. It was like 4 a.m, and he had actually tried to join the Marines because he wanted to, fight in the war when America joined the war, because that's just what people were doing. And he was quite nearsighted, and he had flat feet because he had rickets as a kid, and so he was dismissed as medically unfit, and he was really bummed by that. He wanted to go and help the Allies, and he got this call and just literally in the middle of the night, and it said, is this Edward Weiss? I was like, yes, it is. It's like, do you still want to serve your country? He's like, yes, I do. It's like, all right, be at this address in Baltimore tomorrow night at 6 p.m. And so he just shows up, could be anything. And these guys go and they say they're from the OSS. And so we're recruiting for the OSS, we're recruiting for spies. And so we need you to go and collect information that if an enemy were to, be in America, that this would benefit them. And, something that, that you could find out clandestinely. And which is a bit interesting. You don't even know. I mean, this could be the enemy, just like putting you up to something. And they're like, you get caught, you'll get tried for, treason and espionage, and we're gonna disown you. We're not gonna stick up for you and all these sorts of things. So, this is on you. And so he thought about it, and he literally had like a day or two to figure something out. And so it had no directions. They had no, like, this is what we want you to do. Go figure it out. It's like, you just go figure something out. You go find something that would help an enemy. And so we went down to B&O Railroad yard, and he just was talking to them and said, hey, I'm from the press. I'm from, whatever, Washington Examiner or whatever the hell he said. And, I just want to make, I just want to, do something on the war effort, how great you guys are, and how wonderful it is. You're shipping things around and all that sort of stuff. Obviously for, food and supplies and things like that for the domestic, operations, not military operations. That no one knew about that. Obviously, that was very clandestine. But he had a feeling that they were obviously moving munitions and military material around. And so they're like, okay, do you have your press pass? It's like, you know what? I was just, I was having my coffee this morning, still it on my pants. I just changed my pants. It was actually in there. I'm so sorry. I just don't have it on me. I mean, I can go get back and get it, but as well, they're like, oh, it's okay. So he's able to charm these guys into letting him go through. And they were walking around the railroad jars. Oh yeah, and this is what we do, and this is how we're shipping out this food to here. We're getting milk over here. We're doing this over here, and all these other sort of things. And he noticed that as they're going and just becoming friends, they're there for like 2 hours in the train yard, and he noticed that there's just this little patch, this little area, this corner of the large rail yard that they just were avoiding. And when he would sort of steer them sort of close to that, they would just sort of steer him away. And so we finally had sort of charmed them enough. He goes, what's this over here though? Like, what's going on over here? Like, this little area here. And he's like, all right, well, this is what we're doing. And actually, what? I was like, this is where all the tanks are. And this is where all the munitions are. We're moving this. So these bases, and this is over here. We're going to, set up, because if they get into the Eastern Seaboard, we need to be set up in these areas here. We're shipping these out to this area to go and
oh my gosh, he could have been anyone.
And the guys who said they were from the OSS could have been anyone. And that's the craziest thing. And so he got all this information back, and he goes back to him that night. And the guy, the whoever it was that was recruiting him, just reading this, is like, how the hell did you find this out? Like, nobody's supposed to know. This is totally classified. This is such top secret stuff. I mean, it was everything. It was like everything they were moving, all the troop movements and material movements. That's exactly what the enemy would want. And so obviously he got the job. and
Amazing.
Yeah, but just think about it. I think you're right. He must have been a very, very charismatic. I always liked, and he's always my grandfather. So he was always just a very nice, kind person to me. And I always saw him be very personable and favorable. But my mom, he was a very stern and strict parent, and so that's the stories you get. But thinking about it, like, he also must have been very, very charismatic in his way as well. And so I think that sort of fits with everything.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about a podcast I heard you on. It was with a rancher, I think, and you were talking about your 100% conversion rate for vegans who actually engage with you.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think there's some of the Edward Weissmuller living on there for sure. I mean, maybe we could talk about how you do that, how you chat to vegans, so that they don't get put off, because I think you see so much wasted energy, don't you, online, and with sort of sales patter for trying to get people to do something, whereas I think the beauty of coaching and what I tend to do with clients is be curious. But I'm curious to know how you go about talking to people who maybe are ill-informed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like you say, everyone's coming from a different place, and you just sort of have to figure out where that place is. Generally there's 3 reasons people go vegan, and that's the thing. I don't discount people's, motivations. And so that's the thing. It's not an us them sort of thing. It's that we're not. I don't need to be on the attack. Like I think that our motivations are probably almost exactly the same. Either you want to fix your health, you want to be as healthy as you can. Environmental impact, and ethical concerns. I think all of those things are very important to think about and to consider, and I think they can all be explained and helped best through a meat heavy diet, if not a meat exclusion diet. But when you do talk about these things, someone's just purely wanted to be like, well, whatever, I generally start with like, okay, well, let's just talk about the nutrition side of things. Now, and of course, this is only people that actually engage. Even if they engage aggressively and they really want to show me up, that's fine, as long as they're willing to have a back and forth. If it's just a F you, you're wrong, I don't want it, then there's nothing you can do, because they don't have that engagement. But of the people that engage, then you can get them, and you just slow and calm, and you just talk about the facts. Usually they'll say, why, well, but cholesterol causes this, and okay, well, let's talk about that, and you go into that. They'll usually pick the topics, and you can just start talking about it. You just start knocking them back one by one by one by one. I said, well, why are you doing that? Well, biologically, I think all the evidence shows that humans are carnivores. I think that's what we're best designed to eat. There are defense chemicals in plants. They're not really bioavailable nutrients. It's hard for us to digest it. We can't get anything out of fiber, all these sorts of things. So you sort of lay down the groundwork that fundamentally we are carnivores biologically. And they said, well, what about cholesterol? What about fiber? What about constipation? And he's like, okay, and you have that. And so you have all those answers. They make sense. They're straightforward. They're not something that you need a lot of scientific know-how to parse out. It's just straightforward. LDL was a lie. That's something that's been categorically proven. It's just a matter of record. Like the sugar companies paid people off to vilify cholesterol and to exonerate fat. One of those guys was named head of the USDA. He was the one who pushed this whole 1977 study. It's published. Those things are published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. So that's the end of the story there. And you can go on from there. And then, and then they'll say, okay, well, what about the environmental impact? And you say, okay, well, yes, I agree. That's very important. We need to talk about that. But, right now we're just talking about nutrition. We're just talking about what's best for us to eat. And like, okay. So you keep them on track, because it's the red herring. They want to just divert off and, go out down different lanes because they're like, okay, I'm losing this. And so let's go somewhere else. And so you keep them down on the nutrition side of things until they go through all of the different concerns that, well, what about this? And they're all the same. I mean, that's why it's so easy, because, I've gone through Michael Greger's side. I've gone through the Dean Ornish's stuff. I've gone through all of these guys, and because I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything, and so I was like, okay, this looks pretty solid to me. What's the other side of the argument? I didn't want to be missing something. And, all of their stuff was either based on this misinformation, flat out lies, or misunderstanding biology and physiology, or they just make stuff up. I mean, there's a lot of that. You see some things where they just flat out make it up. It's demonstrable. And you say, well, that's not true. Here you go. And so I know all the arguments. They're always the same. And so, it's not hard to, once you get those answers down, you can just repeat them pretty fluently, and you just bang them down one after the other. And finally, they'll just go, okay, well, nutritionally, sure. I understand that, this is the best way to do it. You really can't get equivalent nutrition from a vegan diet, even if with heavy supplementation. And yes, there's these defense chemicals that can cause harm. Okay, yeah, so I agree with that. But, environmentally, we couldn't possibly do that. It's not sustainable. Great. Okay, let's talk about that, and you actually talk about how animals are actually what makes the environment. They are the environment. It's plants and animals. We've co-evolved together. And without animals and herbivores eating down the vegetation, you don't make room for new vegetation to come up. You're not recycling nutrients into the soil. You're not keeping the soil fresh and vital. And we don't have an environment, and things go to deserts, and we have people reversing deserts by actually moving animals into it and moving in herds of animals, bunched and moving like a migrating herd. And there was a group in Panama that took 20,000 head of sheep, I think, through Patagonia, and I think it's Patagonia, and so not Panama. Anyway, where the hell Patagonia is? And so it took like 20,000 head of sheep down through there, and in 1 year they increased the vegetation by 50%, right? And so that's a major difference. So that's actually really helping. And it's monocrop agriculture that destroys the ground. You're stripping nutrients out of the soil to go into the plant. Even broccoli now. There was something I read the other day that broccoli now is has one third the nutritional content that it did 70 years ago, and that's just soil degradation, right? We lose 27.5 billion tons of topsoil a year just from the farming techniques. That's an area the size of Kentucky every single year, or 150, Ireland and a half, every single year. And that's a very limited resource. I mean, people think that fossil fuels are limited. Topsoil is limited. About 1 centimeter takes 500 years to develop. And we are losing an area the size of Kentucky every year. That is going to run out. And so, when you talk about that, and you talk about how, during the Dust Bowl in America, we almost turned the middle of America, one of the most verdant and fecund pieces of soil on Earth. We almost turned that into another Sahara Desert because of the farming techniques. And then we figured that out and we were able to reverse it. But that's where the Sahara Desert comes from, because that did not used to be a desert. There was a study back in the 1990s in Egypt, and they took soil samples underneath the pyramid and the Sphinx, and they were like, oh, well, there's always deserts. We have movies about Moses and things like that. It's always desert and all that stuff, because that's what it is now. Well, it wasn't then. They found that the soil samples were like, actually, no, these were built in jungles. These were jungle pyramids. These were jungle people, and now it's turned into a desert. You read the epic Gilgamesh. It's talking about these lush grasslands and verdant fields and cedar forests that are like old growth. No, it had never seen an axe. All these sorts of things. That's in modern day Iraq. And so that changed. And so what changed? Well, this is where agriculture was born, and then Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world. And they say that the reason that it was so successful was because the Nile River would flood every year and replenish all the nutrients in the farmland every year. Well, what does that mean? That means you're stripping out all the nutrients every year, and you need to replenish them every year. So places that don't have a Nile to flood, they're going to turn into a desert. And that's what happened. And so if there's been satellite using sort of infrared looks at the Sahara Desert, and they found there was actually cities like all over it, so it's like all these different, cities and developments all over what is now the Sahara Desert. So they've been just all wiped out by this desertification. And that comes directly from agriculture. And I believe, and I think that's quite evident, especially with, the Dust Bowl and things like that. And you have people like Alan Savory, who's still sort of the opinion, because he was traditionally taught, environmental scientist, that it was the herding animals that destroyed, that caused the big deserts of the world, right? That's what he says. But then at the same time, in the same breath, he says, but we need big herds of animals to reverse all the deserts in the world. So I think he's still looking at it from that lens, because he was traditionally taught, he thought this in traditional way, hey, animals are destroying the land, we need to get animals out of this land. They found out, oh my gosh, that's making the deserts worse. So I think that is not from the animals. I don't think it was from herding. I think it was absolutely, well, it could be a combination, over grazing, but I think that that's almost, well, I think that a major portion of it is going to be from the agriculture as well, because you're just losing so much topsoil. We were getting dust storms, and these massive dust storms would take days and weeks to go over, locust swarms, all these sorts of things during the Dust Bowl era. And it sounded like a Bible story, it sounded like, something out of Exodus, the plagues that God rained down on Pharaoh. And that's what people thought. They thought this was the wrath of God for, slovenly behavior and things like that. And so, then they figured it out. No, this is from farming. Well, apparently Pharaoh didn't figure it out. And that's a sign that you're losing all this topsoil. It's blowing up in the wind. It's washing away with the rain. That's causing the soil and the ground to be right conditions for these locusts to just come, charging through and destroying, crops and everything like that. So I think that that's what that's from. And so you point all these things out, and people they're just like, damn it. and so you go through and they're like, well, but it's it's really not nice to kill animals. It's horrible, and they treat them so horribly. Like, yes, I agree. We have a social contract with animals. We need to take care of them. That is of paramount importance. But we're talking about the environment right now. So just environmentally, that's, and they're like, okay, right, I agree. Livestock, animals are better for the land, than crops. But, ethically, like, great, I'm glad you asked. And then you go into that out that you have to kill 25 times the amount of sentient animals to grow 1 pound of plant-based protein versus animal-based protein. And they're like, damn it. And you go, there's like, more and more arguments from there. So you keep them on track. You go through just the nutrition side of things. Then you move on to whatever the next distraction is, usually environment. And then you get on to ethics as well. And you just, I mean, the answers are there, and as long as you're able to calmly engage and not call the other person names, even if they're calling you names, then they usually come around. I've had people even aggressively try to argue me. I remember before I was with my girlfriend now, there was a girl that I knew. She was a nurse, and we were chatting and getting familiar, and talked about going on a date or something like that. And then she decided she couldn't date me because I remember the text, she said, well, because I'm a vegan, and I just don't think this would work. Ethically, I'm a vegan, and all these sorts of things about vegan. I was just like, okay, well, that's fine, but it's actually nicer to do it this way. And she's like, well, what? And we started going into it, and just over a series of texts, she's like, damn it. All right. And so even though people can call you names and be rude to you, if you're just calm and you just answer the question, it's like, okay, well, why is that? Well, why do you think that? What makes you think that that's a better way of doing it? And they're like, well, it's obviously, because no one really challenges these beliefs, because right now it's the in vogue, it's fashion.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And the obviously word is so interesting. People say, well, obviously this, or like you said around the plague of locusts in the US, it seems like a biblical curse. There's this, simple, straightforward, seemingly correct explanations for things that human beings latch onto, even if they're flat wrong, And I think that comes back in some sense to what McGilchrist talks about with the left-right hemisphere differences, where you get this left hemisphere capture of ideas. We want to have a shortcut to answer complicated things in our lives. I think sometimes deferring expertise is vital. We can't all be experts at every area. We all want iPhones, but nobody should be expected to know how to build one, except the people who that's their job. And like even then,
in China
specialize. Yeah. Well, I've got a Samsung, so mine's from South Korea, but we're splitting hairs.
Me too. So that's fine. Yeah. So
we're morally
right
better than
this one. Yeah.
Like all Zeno's paradox with the arrow, where this ancient philosopher who said something like this: an arrow is flying through the air, and therefore it's either where it's going to be or where it is now. But if it's where it's going to be, then it's not where it is now. Therefore, an arrow can't fly. Therefore, nothing can move.
Yeah.
And part of our brain's kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. But And then the other part's like, well, obviously it doesn't make sense. I'm moving right now. Everything moves. We've seen an arrow hit the target. It's ridiculous. So we are susceptible, aren't we, to thinking certain things about the world so that we can just get on with our lives. And I think the same is true of ourselves. You know, when I talk to clients about what their core beliefs are about themselves, then quite often you can tease out through curiosity that the people aren't really being kind to themselves. They might say something about themselves, and I say, well, you know, if your best friend or a family member had the same problem that you have, would you give that advice? Would you say that to them? And they're horrified. Of course they are. I think very often we can end up in an angry position around whether it's diet or the state of the world, and think about some disaster coming up. And it's almost a projection of how we feel about ourselves. And I don't know how you've found this, but people who seem to get better metabolically and maybe mentally, they tend to have a calmer worldview, and can engage with the world in a way that's more pleasant, not just to them living their own lives, but to people that they talk to, whether they've got the charm skills of an Edward Weissmuller or not.
Yeah. I always love those logical paradoxical puzzles. I think there was one that he did as well that was with Tortoise and Achilles, right? So Achilles is famous, the hero of Troy, and he was a famous sprinter. He's supposed to be just fast as hell. And so they said there's like, if you had a turtle with any sort of head start, he'd win any race against even Achilles, right? And the argument was that, yes, the turtle's moving at a certain pace and Achilles is moving faster, but it takes time X to go to the halfway point between where he started and where the turtle is now. But at that point, the turtle's moved just a little bit. So now that's moved things now. So now he has to go halfway between where he is now and where the turtle is now. And during that time, the turtle's moved. And so the turtles move, the turtles move, the turtles move. So the way that they logically constructed this or verbally constructed this is that you could never pass the halfway point, because there will always be a new halfway point because the turtle's always moving. And obviously, that's what we will pass that, but it just ties your brain in knots. It's things like, okay, well, how the hell can I describe how that's stupid? Because I know it's stupid, but it's like, but it makes logical sense at the same time. So I always love those. Those are a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's like an integration of common sense, wisdom, intuition into the world, which takes place on one side of our brains and forms these kind of human connections. And I think, McGilchrist talks about how a river isn't the water and it isn't the land. It's the betweenness of the two things. And I think that's it kind of sums up the magic that happens during coaching of any kind that's done well, but particularly health coaching. When I'm thinking about the transformation that takes place in health coaching clients when they become what they want to be and they feel like they're human beings with a new lease of life, that is not the same as describing an HbA1c improvement or a mood score improvement. That is that's the wonder of being alive. And I think it couldn't happen when they're just living in isolation, and I couldn't make it happen living in isolation. It's the betweenness of the coach-client connection. And I think it resolves a lot of these types of paradoxes. And the Zeno's arrow one and the Achilles in the hair, that's brilliant. It kind of flummoxes you for a minute. I think people are complicated and they want to be heard, and that's what coaching allows them to do is be messy but complete somehow.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on today. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a great conversation. How do people get in touch with you, and how do they find you if they want to speak to you about coaching or learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so anyone who feels like they could do with a mental tune-up, or even someone who's been diagnosed with a mental disorder and wants coaching to support them metabolically, or clinicians who want to work with us and signpost their patients to small groups, can go to metpsy.com, metpsy.com. I myself tend to lurk around on Twitter more than any of the other social media platforms, and I'm at Ali Transforms, which is ALLY Transforms. So hopefully, people who are listening get in touch, and we can talk about, getting you involved. It's exciting. I think there's a need for it, sadly, but we have really enjoyed the work we've done with people so far.
Yeah, well, great. Well, thank you very much for coming on. If everyone who's enjoyed this, please send this on to someone that you think may benefit from it, someone who may be suffering from mental health issues, that doesn't know about these sorts of options that are available to them. I think it was Dr. Palmer from Harvard who said that only about 10% of people actually respond to psychiatric medication. The rest maybe have some results, but others don't really have any results. Just a ketogenic diet shows it's actually can give improvement for these people when they don't have other options, and medications aren't working for them as well. So this is something that can be a very, very powerful tool in the arsenal to get people better. So hopefully anyone who is listening will take that on board and pass this on to anyone who they think could use it. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. If you like that, please hit the like and subscribe, leave a comment, and do share this with anyone that you think you would find it useful. And you can find me on Instagram at Anthony Chaffee MD, or Twitter, Anthony_Chaffee. And then if someone wants to join our Patreon community and get more online support and community help, that is just Anthony Chaffee MD as well. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Optimal diets. Maybe some people, can be less damaged, have more defenses towards some of these plant poisons and plant toxins. But that does not mean it's optimal for them. That doesn't mean that it's the best thing that they can have. So there is an optimal diet, okay? It is something, all right? So I think all the best evidence shows that that's a carnivore diet. And so regardless of your age, regardless of your issue and your disease, that is the best thing for you to eat, and it will change your life dramatically.